Joining me now is Republican Congressman Tim Griffin. Congressman Griffin, good morning.
Hey, Chuck. How you doing?
I'm all right. I want to start with the reaction you had to Ted Cruz's statement when you guys announced your plan of tying a defunding measure to the president's health care law to the continuing resolution on the budget. What about this statement upsets you? Here's what he said. Let me read it to you. Harry Reid will no doubt try to strip the defund language from the continuing resolution, and right now he likely has the votes to do so. At that point, House Republicans must stand firm, hold their ground, and continue to listen to the American people. Why did you take such offense to that quote?
Well, look, Arkansas is playing Rutgers this weekend, and if the Rutgers team, we know they're probably going to lose, but if they went to their coach and said, look, this is what Arkansas is going to do to beat us, and we're done, what do you think the coach would do? He would say, that's your fight? So, look, I've known Ted Cruz a long time. I've known you a long time. I've known Ted Cruz since 2000. And the bottom line is friendly encouragement, okay? We saw that statement. I saw the statement, and I thought, that's no way to begin a fight, a long, hard battle over something that we think is critically important and something that a number of people, not just senators, but a number of people ran around in many of our districts in August and said, this is the way it has to be done. This is the way it has to be done. We can get it done. And look, we all know that Jim DeMint does not have a magic wand. It's going to take a lot of work over there to get something moving, and I think the posture that we needed to see was the posture that Ted and others portrayed in the press conference yesterday, where they said we're unified and we're going to fight.
You know, a Republican anonymously said this to National Review. I want to read you this quote. If Cruz doesn't help us in the Senate to pass a defunding bill, we'll end up having to pass a normal CR. It'll be pathetic, but I expect him to slam us for it. Is that a fair portrayal?
Well, beware the anonymous quotes in Washington.
Understandable.
But, look, the bottom line is this. They've been asking for the ball. We're going to give them the ball. We're still on the same team. We're going to be cheering them from the sidelines, but they're going to have the ball. We're going to see what they can do, and I'm not going to prejudge hypotheticals of where we go from here. But clearly they have a lot of responsibility. Look, they have rules that we don't have. Not to get in the weeds, but you know in the House, the majority pretty much rules. In the Senate, there are protections in their procedures that allow the minority to do certain things. And I will say this. There are a lot of folks over there that we haven't heard from, Republicans, and even some Democrats who don't want to vote again on Obamacare that we've yet to hear from. And I think that there's a role for the grassroots here. I think there's a role for the public to engage in this vigorous debate, and we'll see what happens. I'm not going to prejudge it. I was born an optimist, and I remain an optimist.
But how realistic are you? If the Senate, essentially, the votes aren't there for this, what is your mindset? Do you sit there and say, okay, you pass a bill that can become law at that point? Do you start working on that after you're doing what you're doing today? Some would argue you're sending a message, that this is a message vote. But if it fails in the Senate and the Senate Republicans aren't able to do what you'd like them to do, does the legislation become more realistic, shall we say? Well,
first of all, you know me, I'm pretty practical, and I want to make things work. I don't want to shut down the government. Why? I don't think it helps anybody. I don't think it helps the American people. It doesn't help Arkansans. It doesn't help the economy. It doesn't help any of us. So I'm not for shutting down the government. In fact, I'm against shutting down the government. I am very practical. But I've also learned that good war plans are good through the first volley, and then everything changes. So I am going to be ready to do everything that we can and be realistic about it. But I'm not willing to surrender before the battle has begun.
I want to ask you about the vote yesterday on food stamps, a very partisan vote, all Republicans voting for this reform, which will turn into a cut in the program of $4 billion a year over the next 10 years. a lot of that funding is likely to get restored in the conference committee because of what can get through the Senate. So considering that all the headlines today are about House Republicans cut food stamps for the poor in some form or another, not exactly the public relations advancement that I assume the party would want. So was that vote worth it yesterday?
Well, sure. Look, I'm sure that the headlines at MSNBC are a little different than the headlines elsewhere.
Well, I'm looking all the headlines around today. I mean, let me know if you found the headline that said House Republicans vote to reform the food stamp program.
Right. Well, if anybody
a lot
reads,
of them were cut.
Sure. If anybody reads below the headline and actually reads the article or reads the legislation, then it is very apparent that a lot of the reforms that are put in there are very much like some of the Clinton-era reforms, work requirements and what have you. So, look, yeah, I think it was a good vote. There are a lot of hard votes that we take up here, like Medicare reform and what have you. But if we don't vote for reform, reform ain't happening. And that's why we have the fiscal disaster we have. As we end up getting into the debt ceiling debate, I think you're going to see more talk about reform. Will they be easy votes? No. I'm on the House Ways and Means Committee, and I'm sure we're going to have tough votes. That's why I'm sent up here. I don't. That doesn't bother me. I think there were great reforms in there, and but we're going to. Let me tell you this: we're going to be looking in the debt ceiling debate, tax reform, entitlement reform, Medicare reform. Why? Because if we don't, we're in big trouble.
All right. Tim Griffin, I got to leave it there for time. Republican from Arkansas. All right, we'll see how your Razorbacks do against Rutgers. I imagine they'll be favored in that one.
No offense to MSNBC.
All right, Suey.
Thank you, ma'am.